Welcome to Norway. Welcome to the Ford GT. And this is our story. We took the Ford GT to Norway for two main reasons. Actually make that three. One, because we could. Two, because we wanted to drive it and film it on the incredible Atlantic Ocean Road, right out on Norway's breathtakingly beautiful west coast. And three, because we wanted to set a new lap record at the Arctic Circle Raceway, which is 500 miles north of the Atlantic Road, right up near the town of Mo i Rana, making it the northernmost racetrack in the world. And on our journey, well, we'd find out all about the Ford GT. Find out how good it is as a supercar. Find out whether it's actually worth £450,000 or not. Find out ultimately whether it deserves a place among the true greats. And stop number one was the Atlantic Ocean Road.
I'm not sure life gets much better than this as a car journalist. It's taken quite a long time to set this up, but every single second of it has been worth it, because this car, the Ford GT, on this road, the Atlantic Ocean Road, is an absolute dream come true if you're a petrol head, and I am. The road itself, it was built, as we know, in the 90s, and it's won all sorts of design awards because of these mad bridges that kind of corkscrew their way across all these lakes and islands. Admittedly, the speed limit is somewhat low during the daytime. It's a little bit higher at night, but even so, Norwegian speed limits are pretty draconian, and if you bust them, they put you behind bars. So I cannot do that on this road. I can give it the odd squirt, like now. Thank you, seat. But you know what? It doesn't actually matter that much that you can't tear across this road, because the Ford GT is really rather an enjoyable thing just to tootle about in. Yes, you want to let rip in it. Yes, because it's got 647 horsepower and a carbon tub, carbon ceramic brakes. This thing is basically a Le Mans car that's been legalised for the road. And I've criticised it slightly for that in the past, because it actually feels a little bit rough and ready compared with something like a McLaren or a 488 GTB. But those cars have been designed 100% for road use. The Ford GT isn't like that. This thing is an absolute track monster that just so happens to have number plates and a fairly civilised interior. We're going to find out all about what it's like on the track. And I suspect the answer is going to be utterly brilliant and very, very quick. But even on the road, I drove it in the States, this car, and I just thought it was a little bit coarse for a road car. But having spent a lot more time in it now on these fantastic Norwegian roads, not necessarily at breakneck speeds, I'm really, really utterly falling for the Ford GT. And how can you not fall for a car that makes noises like that and which goes like this? The things I'm really falling for with the GT is not just the way it sounds and the way it goes, but all the way it looks, which is utterly sensational. We've had this car for a couple of days now in this part of Norway, and everyone stops to ask you if they can take a photograph of it. Everyone wants to know how much power it's got. Quite a few people don't know what it is, which is quite cool, I think. There are only 2 of these things in Europe, so you can't really blame the people of Norway for not knowing what it is. But it really is a crowd pleaser. But I'm starting to fall quite a lot more for the steering, which is quite heavy, quite meaty, but actually you know utterly where the front end is on this car. The brake feel is also delicious, and the brake power is monstrous. Okay, I think we've seen enough of this beautiful Atlantic Ocean road, and it is stunning. It really is, as you can see from the footage that we show you, particularly from the air. But there is a second part to this story, and that involves going up to the Arctic Circle Raceway, the northernmost racetrack in the whole world. And the idea of taking the Ford GT up there is to try and break the road car lap record, which I think this thing will do at a canter. So really there's only one thing left to do now at this stage of this video, and that is drive up to the Arctic Circle Raceway. See ya.
So then we bid farewell to the Atlantic Road and the various cars and people we met there when filming the GT. And then we began our journey north, up to Trondheim on the E39, across yet more fjords, through forests, across yet more incredible looking bridges. And then north of Trondheim, we took the amazing E6 road, which winds its way up the western half of Norway for hundreds of miles. And for long chunks at a time, you sometimes don't see any other cars for what seemed like hours, even in the more popular summer months. And this means that you can let rip a bit, even in a Ford GT. And that part of our journey then became, well, pretty special.
This road trip's starting to get quite tasty now. I mean, the Atlantic Ocean Road was, I think, one of the most beautiful places, and certainly roads, that I've ever driven a car on. It's just spectacular. But now we're on our way up to the Arctic Circle Raceway, which is quite a long way north in Norway. It's about 400 miles. No, it's not. It's about 460 miles. So quite a road trip. We're about 50, 60 miles south of Trondheim, and the scenery is totally different from the stuff you find down at the Atlantic Ocean Road, which just basically feels like you're driving across the moon. This is really woody. It feels a little bit like kind of deep south, a combination of deep South America and Scotland. And you're kind of out on your own. You really don't see. You see like one car every 20 minutes. It's fantastic. The first time I drove it, I thought it was utterly uncivilized and really not very usable on the road at all. But so long as you put it in the right settings and kind of dial the dampers back, it's all right just to chip about in. It really is. It's comfortable. The motor still makes too much din, really, and you get this kind of boom resonance period right in the speed range that you want to when you're just bumbling about in it, which is a bit of a pain in the neck. But it's all right though. I'm warming to it, and blimey, am I warming to Norway. This place is beautiful. It really is. First time I drove the GT, I thought Ford were being just a little bit cynical with their marketing of the car, because to begin with they said they were going to make 500, and then they just got this queue of people, like thousands of people, about 8,000 people that went, okay, yes please, I'll have one, I don't care how much it costs, I just want one. So then they doubled that to 1,000. And originally, I think the list price was quoted at £320,000, but now it's £450,000. So you kind of think, okay, so they've realised that they can sell them 10 times over. Let's just whack 130 grand on the price and see if we can get away with it. But there are still over 7,000 people that want one of these things and who aren't going to get one. So is that cynical on Ford's behalf, or is that actually just a really sharp way of making a load of money out of a car? I don't know. But anyway, onward and northward we go. Next stop, the Arctic Circle Raceway. Wow, here we are. Here we are, the Arctic Circle Raceway. They built it in the middle of a quarry, but it's actually a lot more beautiful than that already, because there are trees everywhere and there's snow on the mountains up there. Oh man, this place is funky. Wow, I wonder what the track's like. I wonder what the layout's like. Oh my word. We've got snow on the mountains, we've got a bit of a waterfall up there, we've got clouds underneath the mountains. Man, this place looks fantastic. Whoa, playground, proper playground. Oh, I love the pit garages. They look like they're out of 1946. There's this quite nice control tower, and then which they've clearly spent quite a few grand on, and then the pit garages look like they've spent the remaining 68p on them. But I quite like that, that's quite cool.
The Arctic Circle Raceway was built in 1995 and sits just a few kilometres outside the Arctic Circle itself. As we've said before, it's the northernmost racetrack in the world, and it's used mainly for bike racing nowadays. In any car, but especially a Ford GT, it really is a proper driver's circuit, with 13 corners, most of which are seriously quick, and all of which have a lovely natural, undulating fluidity to them. And when it's damp, which is quite often the case in this part of Norway, the ACR is just about the perfect place to have a right old muck about in a 647 bhp Ford GT. I've already driven the Ford GT on a track in the States on the launch, and
I thought it was much better on the track than it was as a road car. Having driven it in Norway all over the shop, I now think it's a much better road car than I did before. But on the track, this thing's awesome. It really is. I mean, I think it would toast a 488 GTB, and I'm kind of beginning to think it would toast this McLaren 720S around the track as well, because it's particularly a track like this, because it's flipping fast and all the aero stuff just works a treat. It just means you can carry so much speed into all the quick corners in total confidence that it's going to stick. And it is flaming quick in a straight line as well. And I don't know if there are many road cars that exist at any price that would beat this thing around this track. So how fast is it ultimately? Well, I'm not going to do it because we've gone to quite a lot of trouble to get Stefan Mucker involved in this little idea, and basically we're flying him in. He's one of Ford's Le Mans drivers, as I'm sure you know. And what we're going to do, we're going to bolt him into the GT and just, well, I mean, we're going to see if he can set a new lap record. I reckon he'll absolutely smash it to pieces. So I think before I shunt the GT by playing around with it too much more, I just need to hand the keys over to Stefan and see what he can do.
Once the circuit had dried out, Mucker was straight on it, and we could hear the GT's twin-turbo V6 and its monstrous exhaust note echoing off the scenery all the way around the lap. Within 4 laps, he was already 3 seconds inside the lap record. And then he came back into the pits, climbed out, had a chat with the technicians, and they decided to drop the pressures on the big Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tyres by 4 psi all round. And then he was back into the car, back into track mode, which drops the ride height theatrically, as you can see, and back out onto the raceway again, this time trying a fair bit harder, both visually and audibly. In the end, Mucker got down to a low 1 minute 36, which was almost 5 seconds inside the lap record. Even the bike brigade up at the raceway were mildly impressed with that, especially on road tyres. Stick a set of slicks on the GT and it would have gone 6, maybe even 7 seconds faster, reckoned Mucker. Interestingly, Stefan also said that the road car, which he'd never driven before, felt quite a lot faster than his racing car in a straight line. But then that's because the road car has 647 bhp, whereas the racer is restricted to less than 500 bhp at most circuits. Either way, Mucker was deeply impressed with our bright yellow, road-going Ford GT. A car we'd all grown rather fond of during our week with it in this extraordinary country. But once Mucka had blown the lap record to smithereens, and I'd gone back out in it just for one last play, it was time to put the Ford GT back in its box. Still in one piece, still flawed in one or two aspects perhaps, but overall in a much better place than I thought when I first drove it in the United States. Because warts and all, there really is nothing else out there quite like it at the moment. And so for this reason and more, yes, the Ford GT does deserve its place among the true greats. And in Norway especially, they just can't get enough of this incredible car.